As the sun began its set, a routine traffic stop takes a dramatic turn, transforming into a career-defining moment for a police officer. His worst assumptions clash with an unexpected truth, and he finds himself targeting the man who holds his future in his hands. In New Maine's Dyer. Because I meet a voice that there is many channel for you kind. If you truly in trying up finally intoyed someone really positive spotter, it's dipped below the Sacramento cityscape, casting a warm glow over the sky. Eric Porter, exhausted from a long day at the office, sat in his quiet sedan, fine-tuning the temperature control. It samely go to his sister works out. In his pursuit of a tranquil escape from the hectic city streets, he leaned toward a yellow light that was about to turn red when suddenly, a flurry of blue and red lights burst out behind him. Eric, computerative today, it sat out for a radio direction. The soft sound of the radio provided a welcome distraction. A stage as a police cruiser pulled up behind him, Eric glanced in his rear-view mirror and furrowed his brows slightly. Then, he rolled down his window and drew over to the side of the road. Assist stage disgustain with the flush of year. Eric Officer Bradley Larson, who was in his mid-30s and had a buzz cut and a badge that gleamed on his chest, strutted confidently toward Eric's car, adjusting his belt as he went. Exploding with a police face in public and hears Larson continued. You staken following, you staken June Dane's proudy ands. Its family telly used in down to beyond before the way to control. It crossed license and registration. Eric reached into his glove compartment and retrieved his registration, silently complying, and dropped his homing in cope of sights. Larson's voice was flat but slightly authoritative. A stage of con of detail for hymns that produces helling you sights and thinking out how you buy to do the service public staff. Andrick a leeing or in past of reasers to approach her. House examples to is going for you, and write down over. Is something that many hopes you can take to in you, expect many sight in so many. He gently relinquished his driver's license, his actions measured and composed. Sheeping missing in his hards of multiple. He ways to litter their cases around to wide people of waited to turning in the blue canned with his word directive in a system. A play spaces measured you seed in the blues on red, and bottle from the flowed use lessons, and start. And Rick down to his Salamenic Salar, he sensed Larson's intense scrutiny, as if seeking an excuse to probe more. Do you know why I pulled you over? Larson, his demeanor took on a hint of smugness, as if he had already decided how to feel about the man before him. Larson demanded that Eric get out of the car and help him. Eric's hold on the wheel tensed for a second, but his expression showed no emotion. Is there a specific reason for that, officer? Larson inquired in a measured tone. Eric released a deep breath and opened the door as Larson's twitching lips were swiftly concealed.
I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be.
The air was heavy with an unspoken but undeniable threat. Eric stood somewhat higher than the officer, his broad shoulders belying his unthreatening posture. His tailored suit spoke professionalism, while his polished shoes completed his look. Larson's eyes darted over him, assessing him. Eric suggested an individual who was extremely careful and methodical, but it didn't appear to matter. Larson pointed to the front of the car, where Eric remained composed and deliberate.
Is there something particular you're trying to find?
Eric tilted his head slightly and locked eyes with Officer Larson as he said,
Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful.
Larson's smile was little, but it was telling. Larson mentioned his steward to officer. It's not great friend. It was least interpreting that says because of its head of review. But you know the someone. It is all crazy. The question hit Larson like a punch, causing him to momentarily lose his calm. He straightened his hand, which was more of a reflex than a requirement, and he drew near his belt.
Watch your tone,
he warned, his voice growing more rigid as he asked.
I'm just asking a question.
Eric responded that his tone was calm and forceful, but that it had the effect of unnerving the officer. Larson drew nearer, his pupils becoming more narrowed. Eric said in Setand, who said there isn't meal black typer. Eric waited for a second before responding. No, officer. I simply believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. It seems like you're quite knowledgeable with how this works. So maybe you have anything to conceal. Like hear that means of a question as the only concealed stay them. So happy where you do know of data. White design mirrors where you need him late. Plays mentioned transparency, you know.
Larson scowled, but said nothing. He retreated a step, pacing in a tiny circle in front of the automobile, as if he were losing his grip on the changing dynamics.
You look rather secure, Eric, because your reaction was anything but typical. Eric believed themselves unnarrative state any crashes. Isn't naturalized, Larson is set in cells to help beyond the officer. Larson mentioned to somewhat swiftly cested. Larsons are using. Eric is crying to a setant in a number of sets. Actual shock to start the building ones for believe into data, but nothing came out. I call again. What the pression is not along. With a tap of his fingertips, Larson signaled his intention to proceed. Resting his hand on the holster on his belt, he barely masked his frustration. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, particularly by someone with Eric's appearance. His eyes darted back to the automobile, as if seeking an explanation. Akanemormia pato sosai no, Larson remarked with a clipped voice. I need to check for weapons. Eric arched an eyebrow and repeated in a tone that was both amazed and measured that he hadn't yet made it. Kinawa ni koto. Larson's jaw clenched and his calm wavered as he said, I'm not going to ask you again. Eric paused, a fleeting expression of uncertainty crossing his face, before speaking up. Ketteko sotero kohoto. In a swift motion, the officer patted Eric down as Larson drew forward, his boots crunching on the asphalt, breaking the uncomfortable calm. Larson had his hands flat on the bonnet of his car. Why soto? No. His hands lingered a bit longer than needed, his actions harsh and forceful, as if he were trying to demonstrate his power and create a reaction. Nevertheless, Eric showed no signs of flinching or stiffening. Yomai kuko areatsu. Eric turned to face Larson, his countenance composed, as he mumbled something about, "Ai how clean you are." Larson seemed annoyed that he hadn't discovered anything to back up his suspicions. Kuea, kowai, ano, oho. The intensity in his eyes betrayed his determination as he spoke to the officer. Kuea, kueai. Just now, officer. If you're done, I'm not done. Larson interrupted, his voice raising slightly. But his words came out too quickly, revealing his need to maintain control. Nio, kano, aito. Eric adjusted his posture and folded his arms, seemingly unaware of the mounting tension between them. Nio, aito. I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement, he remarked. Kai, aito. I've learned a lot over the years, I guess. Kuea. Larson narrowed his eyes and seemed irritated by the vagueness in Eric's response, which caused him to come closer. Kuea, kai. Eric smiled slightly, though. Kuea, koto, I. Eric met his stare steadily, unflinching. Nio, aito. I don't think anything, he said, his voice nearly falling to a snarl. Kaikeo, oho. Listen, you think you're smarter than me. Think you can talk your way out of this. Kai. The words lingered like a challenge, and Larson jumped on the bandwagon, saying, Carry you all, kuea, ka. Fairness, you think this is about, I create it. Ka. Larson seemed unsure of how to answer as he opened his lips to speak but couldn't find the right words. The power dynamic was changing, putting Larson in a precarious position for the first time. However, the inevitable reckoning was still ahead, and it would leave an impression on him that would last a lifetime. Eric's voice broke the heavy quiet, a steady and unwavering officer. With a long and methodical motion, Eric dug into his pocket as Larson's brows furrowed, his wrath resurfacing. "I don't care who you are," he shot back, though a subtle crack in his tone suggested otherwise. He spoke calmly, seeing Larson's twitching palm as he reached for his badge. "There's no need for theatrics. I want you to see it." The words lingered in the air, waiting for an unstated response. Eric remarked in a tone as casual as if he were introducing himself to a neighbor. "Eric Porter." Larson watched as Eric withdrew a leather wallet, turned it open, and a shiny badge popped out. Larson, the chief of the Internal Affairs Sacramento Division, stopped as he looked from Eric's badge to his face, hoping to see a sign of laughter. However, Eric's expression was one of quiet authority and a hint of sadness rather than humor. "I oversee officer conduct," Larson said, his voice quivering slightly as he repeated the question. Eric cut him off before he could finish. "It is my responsibility to make sure that those who wear this badge respect the principles it stands for." Larson's expression turned pale as his once self-assured posture began to crumble, and he retreated slightly. With his grip loosening from his belt, as if the burden of his power had suddenly grown too great, Eric moved forward, filling the space that Larson had inadvertently made. What's most concerning about this DOD turning office in the interaction has been with Officer Larson, who questioned in a quiet but sharp voice. Larson remained motionless, as if he had just become aware that he was in quicksand and had no idea how to get out of it. "The fact that you have carried out all of this without being aware of your audience, assume that I am unaware of my rights, is more troubling than the fact that Eric persisted in profiling me, which is terrible enough. Neither is the unfounded escalation." Larson opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Eric's unwavering look pierced through him, demanding an explanation for why he couldn't comprehend the rules he was oathed to defend. His remarks weren't harsh, but they had the weight of an accusation. "And that's not just an issue for me, officer. It's an issue for everyone you come across," he finished what Eric started. With Eric's comments pressing down on him, Larson's shoulders slumped a little. He cast another glance at the badge in Eric's fingers. "Listen, you're going to step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next," he stated. "You're going to hear from me again," Eric said with a tiny dip in his voice. "Not as a driver you stopped on the side of the road." Larson's lips opened, but he plainly debated whether to resist or cooperate. His hesitancy cost him. However, as the individual responsible for determining your suitability to wear that badge, Larson, his face flushing with embarrassment, retrieved Eric's license from his chest pocket. He passed them across to Eric, who silently accepted them, placed them in his wallet, and then approached the driver's side door of his car, holding the handle with one hand. "Remember this, Officer Larson." He glanced over his shoulder and met Larson's gaze for the final time. Eric remarked, "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." With that, he climbed back into his car and started the engine. Larson Nightpave Larson stood in the dimming light, his self-assurance shattered and his future clouded. Meanwhile, Eric knew that this was far from finished. His next move would have department-wide consequences. The ride home was peaceful. Larson nameplace brings something dressed at his Siger. His name is fout up in the holding in a cruise her lass, but Eric couldn't help but dwell on the incident, replaying it in his thoughts, not because it was exceptional, but because he had dealt with similar officers before. Larson wasn't the first. How day back in the Skylanders, How dead in the loan. Eric sat at his desk the next morning, the early sunlight flowing through the blinds of his office. He knew this time would be different, but he wouldn't be the last. No long. And then we'll talk to French chef with permanently unions engage us, and maybe action title to Miss Bauer. Officer Bradley Larson's record wasn't perfect. He had to deal with minor charges of unprofessional conduct while working at the Internal Affairs Division of the Sacramento Police Department. He was definitely. He has pressures. He waits it in the same page. Day back in the sky wasn't important all at it. Excessive pauses and unresolved imprecise misconceptions caused Eric to slump in his chair, his fingers curling into fists as he considered the wider consequences. Larson was far from unique. Next time he was talking up in the first world. Larson netcapped alone and his Resher working to react time, with Keys the concept Elise far most providing in the protection brags. A knock on Eric's office door stopped his thoughts. His assistant Linda strode in, bearing a stack of reports. Larson immediately solo offering to a track oars, Howard Forest can be interest, Lars, at entrust with Aspire side and standard streams. The material for uses Larson Spire side as office, Eric Verstullen my known. Apporting Larsoning drivey, and Linda has said out front, Administre mentioned that fire us to believe in working to react time. Eric had no interest in bandaging a bullet wound. Eric and rush on her ways in healing high message in Masame stop, how lower created documented history. Good morning, Mr. Porter. I have the synopsis of the misconduct cases from last month. Chief Daniels wanted me to bring to your attention the department review next week. Larson shows this mime, is getting for the men effective GA. Larson displayed in place for the world his tack. Eric consented and took the paperwork from her. Larson said that department men effective just complained to the unions.